Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the What If guy, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Issei Had Unlimited Blade Works. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. The words echoed in his mind like a cruel joke, twisting into something venomous now that he knew the truth. His breath came in ragged gasps, the metallic taste of blood thick on his tongue. He pressed a trembling hand to his stomach, trying to stifle the warmth spilling from the wound. His fingers felt slick, his strength fading with each passing second. He cursed her, wishing her the worst. Yuma's smile, so sweet and deceptive, flashed through his mind. Was it all truly a lie? A well-crafted deception meant to lure him in, to cut him down before he even had a chance to understand why? Did he possess something they wanted? Some hidden potential he had never even realized? He refused to let this take him down. His knees buckled, but he fought to stay upright. Pain flared through his body, sharp and unforgiving, yet his mind burned with something stronger than agony defiance. Then a flash. A sky streaked with crimson, the air heavy with the scent of steel and fire. Swords, countless swords, stretched as far as the eye could see, some pristine, others rusted with age embedded in the earth like silent sentinels. The wind howled through the desolate landscape, carrying whispers he couldn't quite understand. The sky flickered between hues of crimson and gold, caught between the glow of a setting sun and the embers of a dying fire. Was he hallucinating? No, it felt too real. The weight of the air, the distant hum of steel vibrating against steel, these sensations weren't dreams. They were memories woven into his very existence. He could feel the weight of each weapon, the lingering heat of the flames, the distant echoes of battles fought long ago. A sudden pull jolted him back to his body as blinding pain shot throughout him like molten iron. His breath hitched as his body arched involuntarily due to the agonizing pressure wrapping around his wound, almost as if an unseen hand was forcing his flesh back together in the most painful way possible. He gritted his teeth as his trembling fingers clawed at the dirt beneath him. The sharp sting of something foreign moving throughout his body sent waves of nausea rolling inside him. Then he saw it. From the torn edges of his wound, thin strands of steel blades began to emerge. Tiny splinters of metal twisted and knitted his flesh together like living sutures. The sight alone was enough to make him shiver as a cold sensation ran down his spine. The sensation was almost unbearable, as if someone had taken a set of rusty nails and driven them deep into his skin. His muscles tensed, and his breath came in short, ragged gasps as he felt each fragment pull and weave, carving through his flesh, working to seal his wounds shut in the most agonizing way possible. His body convulsed. He wanted to scream, to thrash, to do anything to stop it, but his body refused to obey. The process was slow and methodical. Every second felt like an eternity as the small blades stitched him back together, slowly becoming one with his flesh, as if his body had always known it could mend itself this way. Eventually, the pain proved too much to bear. His vision swam, the edges of his world fading into a hazy blur. His limbs, once locked in tense agony, grew heavy, as if weighed down by an invisible force. His breath came in ragged gasps, each one weaker than the last. Was this it? His thoughts grew sluggish, drowning beneath the overwhelming tide of exhaustion. The blades, the impossible, unnatural blades, had done their work, sealing his wounds in a way that defied all reason. Yet the cost had been steep. His strength had been drained completely, leaving only an aching numbness in its wake. As his body slackened, the pamphlet given to him earlier by that strange woman slipped from his pocket, fluttering to the ground beside him. The moment it touched the earth, the paper shimmered, its once plain surface glowing with an eerie crimson light. The sigil imprinted upon it pulsed, as if alive, its glow growing stronger with each passing second. Then, a gust of wind swept through the empty park, carrying with it the faint scent of roses. The air crackled, charged with unseen energy. A soft glow bathed the area in warm red light, casting long shadows over the fallen boy. From the heart of the light, a silhouette emerged, graceful, poised, and utterly otherworldly. Long, crimson hair cascaded like silk, catching the light in waves. Eyes the color of the clearest sapphires gazed down at him, filled with curiosity and something far deeper, something that made it seem as though she already knew him, even though they had never met in person. Rias Gremory knelt beside him, her expression unreadable as she studied the unconscious boy before her. She murmured to herself, reaching out. Her fingers barely brushed against his forehead when the glow of the sigil flared, bathing them both in a soft, radiant light. He barely registered the sensation before his world finally went dark. Was he dead? Not dead, but not truly conscious either. He felt weightless, suspended in a void that wasn't quite empty yet wasn't fully tangible. There was no warmth, no cold, just an endless, drifting sensation, as though he was caught between one world and the next. His body felt distant, unresponsive, yet his mind remained awake, trapped in a strange limbo between awareness and unconsciousness. Then, the silence shattered. A distant clang, steel meeting steel, echoed through the emptiness. Another followed, then another, ringing in rhythmic succession, like the tolling of a great unseen bell. With each impact, something tugged at his senses, pulling him toward a place he knew yet did not remember. And then fire. A dry, suffocating heat washed over him, carrying with it the scent of scorched earth and rusted iron. The air felt heavy, thick with the weight of countless battles that had long since faded into memory. The void around him peeled away like brittle paper, revealing a vast, desolate wasteland stretching endlessly before him. Swords stood in silent vigil, jutting from the cracked and barren earth like grave markers, stretching as far as the eye could see. Some were pristine, their steel gleaming even beneath the oppressive crimson sky, while others lay broken and rusted, their shattered remains half buried in the dirt, forgotten by time. The ground was dry and lifeless, as if no living thing had ever walked here. Above, the sky churned in endless turmoil. Thick, swirling clouds, tinged in shades of deep red and burning orange, rolled across the horizon. They pulsed with an eerie glow, casting an unearthly light over the field of blades. Towering above it all, massive gears loomed, their slow, deliberate rotations filling the air with a distant, rhythmic hum. They turned endlessly, without purpose, without rest, a monument to something long lost. He had seen this place before. Fleeting glimpses of it had come to him when he drifted in and out of consciousness earlier, buried beneath waves of searing pain. And before that, in his dreams that never made sense, yet always left behind a lingering unease. But something was different this time. There were no warriors locked in battle, no clashing blades or ringing steel. The figures he had seen before, fighting with unshakable resolve, were nowhere to be found. The battlefield stood empty, save for the countless swords and himself. His eyes narrowed as his gaze landed on the two blades that had always stood at the forefront of his dreams. Kansho and Bakuya. The married blades. His mind supplied the names effortlessly, as though he had always known them. His feet carried him forward, almost of their own accord, stepping lightly across the cracked, desolate ground. The closer he got, the more he felt it a pull, a quiet hum in the back of his mind, like an unseen thread linking him to the swords before him. They rested half buried in the earth, standing side by side, their curved edges gleaming under the endless crimson sky. Despite the wasteland's oppressive heat, no dust or rust marred their surfaces. They remained pristine, untouched by time, as if waiting for him. He reached out. Kansho, the black blade, felt cool against his fingers as he lifted it free from the ground. Its curved edge was honed to deadly perfection, the dark metal reflecting the crimson sky in a dull, menacing gleam. A faint red hexagonal pattern traced across its surface, almost pulsating with an unseen energy. Near the base, an elegant black and white sigil curved along the metal, seamlessly blending into the bronze guard. The hilt was wrapped in worn black leather, fitting perfectly in his grasp, as though it had always belonged there. Bakuya, the white blade, was its mirror, a flawless twin to its counterpart, yet a stark contrast in appearance. Its curved edge gleamed with a pale, almost ethereal sheen, reminiscent of polished ivory under moonlight. Unlike Kansho's dark, hexagonal pattern, Bakuya's surface was smooth and pristine, reflecting the dim glow of the wasteland. A single bold black sigil adorned its base, identical in design to its twin, yet inverted in color. The bronze guard and worn leather grip felt just as familiar in his grasp, completing the set in perfect harmony. Together, the twin swords exuded an undeniable presence, a balance between shadow and light, yin and yang, inseparable, incomplete without the other. A pair destined to be wielded as one. His fingers tightened around their hilts, a strange familiarity settling over him, as though he had held them 1,000 times before. A memory stirred at the edges of his consciousness, just beyond his grasp. Then the wind howled. A sharp gust tore through the wasteland, sending a ripple across the sea of blades. The great gears above groaned in protest, their endless rotations slowing, as if time itself was faltering. The crimson sky dimmed, the shifting clouds growing stagnant. The world itself seemed to tremble, something deep beneath the cracked earth stirring in response to his presence. And then, as if answering an unseen command, the ground before him split open. A low rumble echoed across the desolate plain as a pedestal of dark stone rose from the shifting dust, its form ancient and weathered. Atop it sat something unmistakable, a gauntlet. His breath caught in his throat. It was massive, unmistakably designed for a hand far larger than his own. Deep crimson scales lined its surface, glistening like molten embers in the dim light. Black, claw-like accents curled around its structure, giving it a draconic, almost predatory appearance. A singular green jewel pulsed at its center, a heartbeat of power that resonated deep within his chest. He knew what this was. The name came unbidden, slipping into his thoughts like a whisper from something far greater than himself. The boosted gear. His fingers twitched, drawn toward the gauntlet as if compelled by an unseen force. The very air around it hummed power, old and boundless, waiting to be claimed. It was a presence, alive in its own way, as though it knew him, recognized him, even when he himself did not fully understand. How did he know that? The thought barely had time to form before doubt slithered in. Hesitation warred with instinct. Was this truly meant for him? Could he even wield something so ancient, so immense? His hand reached out, trembling ever so slightly, fingertips barely grazing the gauntlet's surface, and then, the world shattered. A blinding crimson inferno erupted from the pedestal, raw heat crashing into him like a tidal wave. The wasteland trembled, then crumbled, swords vanishing into dust, the towering gears above grinding to a halt before disintegrating into nothingness. The sky fractured. Reality itself buckled. He barely had time to gasp before the space around him collapsed. The weightless, spiraling abyss swallowed him whole, time and direction ceasing to exist. It was as if he was falling through the void, through something far older than the steel-strewn battlefield, through something far deeper than his own understanding. And then heat. Not just warmth, but powerful, searing heat that pressed in from all sides. It wasn't suffocating, it was alive, watching, judging. It wasn't just fire, it was a presence, something vast and ancient that threatened to burn away all that he was and leave nothing but truth behind. And then, a voice deep, rumbling, and filled with the weight of countless ages. It declared that he had finally come. The words rolled through the space like thunder, vibrating deep in his bones. His heart pounded as his gaze lifted. Two massive emerald eyes stared back. Ancient, piercing, unwavering. A shadow loomed over him, a being whose presence dwarfed his own, coiled within the fire and darkness. The name carried a weight he couldn't explain, settling into his chest like something both foreign and familiar. The vast, empty space around him seemed to tighten, the very air thickening under the sheer gravity of the moment. The silence stretched, pressing in from all sides, heavy and expectant, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Draig's emerald eyes gleamed through the void, twin beacons of raw, ancient power. It was surprising that Draig knew him. The dragon's voice rumbled, a deep, rolling thunder that shook the ground beneath Issei's feet. The force of it reverberated through his bones, settling deep into his core. It wasn't merely heard, it was felt, like the distant tremors of an approaching storm. Issei's breath hitched. He did recognize this name. The instant his eyes had fallen upon the gauntlet, Something deep within him had stirred an instinctive recognition, primal and absolute. It wasn't a fleeting sense of déjà vu, nor a half-remembered dream. It was something far deeper, embedded in his very soul, as if the knowledge had always been there, simply waiting for him to grasp it. Just like Kancho and Bakuya. The thought struck him with startling clarity. The same eerie familiarity, the same unshakable certainty he had felt it before. When his hands had closed around the hilts of the twin swords, there had been no hesitation, no doubt. He had known them, down to the weight in his grip, the balance, the way their curved edges seemed to align perfectly with his intent. They weren't just weapons, they were extensions of himself, blades he had wielded countless times in battles that did not exist within his memories. And now, standing before the ancient dragon, gazing upon the crimson gauntlet that pulsed with untold power, that same understanding took root once more. This wasn't a weapon meant for another. It was his. The knowledge settled in his chest like a burning ember, quiet but unwavering. The gauntlet, the swords, the dragon, they were not coincidences. They were pieces of a puzzle he had yet to fully comprehend, fragments of something far greater than himself. But even without all the answers, he knew one thing for certain. He had been here before. Draig's voice was thick with something that almost sounded like satisfaction, his emerald eyes gleaming as he regarded Issei. The ancient dragon exuded an aura of quiet amusement, as if he had been waiting for this very moment, waiting for Issei to finally see. The heat radiating from Draig intensified, not scorching but encompassing, welcoming. Then, perhaps this conversation would not be as tedious as he feared. Issei bolted upright, his chest heaving as if he had surfaced from the depths of a dark, endless ocean. His eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused, heart pounding in erratic rhythm that echoed in his ears. Morning light filtered softly through unfamiliar curtains, bathing the room in a gentle, golden glow. The air was warm and still, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the dreamscape he had just escaped from. Where was he? The last thing he remembered was the vast wasteland of swords, the towering gears, and the piercing emerald gaze of Draig. The dragon's voice still reverberated in his mind, deep and ancient, filling him with questions and uncertainties. But that world, that presence, it all felt so real. Yet now he was... His breathing slowed, the adrenaline gradually ebbing away, leaving behind a strange sense of disorientation. He ran a shaky hand through his hair, trying to piece together the fragments of memory. That's when he noticed its warmth beside him, soft and unmistakable. Issei's gaze shifted, and his breath caught in his throat. Scarlet hair spilled across the pillows like a river of silk, glistening in the soft morning light. Each strand shimmered as it caught the golden rays filtering through the curtains, a striking contrast against the crisp white sheets. Porcelain's skin glowed softly beneath the warm embrace of daylight, her form utterly serene, undisturbed by his sudden awakening. Issei's breath hitched. Why was she here? His mind reeled as he stared down at the sleeping figure beside him, his heartbeat hammering against his ribs. The Rias Gremory was lying in bed with him. The realization sent a jolt through his system, heat rushing to his face. His eyes darted to the delicate curve of her shoulders, and he swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. Did something happen? His fingers twitched, gripping the sheets as if that might somehow ground him in reality. His memories of the night before were hazy at best, pain, heat, a flash of crimson light, Draig's voice echoing in his mind like a distant storm. Nothing. He had no recollection of how he had ended up here, let alone why Rias was with him. He needed answers. Slowly, carefully, he inched back, mindful not to disturb her, though his every movement felt unbearably loud in the stillness of the room. His body still ached, a dull soreness spreading through his limbs, but he ignored it. Right now, his biggest concern was figuring out what was going on. Another soft breath escaped her lips, and Issei froze. Rias stirred, her long lashes fluttering slightly before she let out a quiet sigh and shifted beneath the covers. The sheet dipped with her movement, and Issei immediately snapped his gaze upward, willing himself not to look. His face burned. His thoughts scrambled. This was bad. Really, really bad. What should he do? His mind raced, scrambling for some kind of explanation, some way to process the utterly impossible situation he had woken up to. Had they? No, that couldn't be right. He would remember if something like that had happened. Wouldn't he? He fought the urge to slap himself, as if pain might somehow force his memories to realign and give him an answer. Instead, all he got was the persistent ache in his body, a dull throbbing that reminded him of just how not normal last night had been. His hands clenched into the sheets. If you just a soft sigh interrupted his frantic thoughts. Rhea stirred, shifting slightly beneath the sheets as her long, crimson hair cascaded over her shoulders. She let out another quiet breath, her body stretching slightly before settling again. Issei held his breath. Please, please let her wake up before his heart exploded from sheer panic. As if answering his silent prayer, she let out a small, sleepy hum, her lashes fluttering. Then, with a slow, elegant motion, her eyes began to open. Deep, sapphire-blue eyes met his. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a small, sleepy smile curved Rias's lips. "Good morning, Issei," she murmured, her voice still laced with drowsiness. She stretched beneath the sheets, her bare shoulders shifting as she let out a content sigh. Issei felt overwhelmed, his mind racing as he tried to process the situation. He croaked out a surprised greeting, his voice cracking as he struggled to comprehend what was happening. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to look away, but his eyes remained fixed on her. Rias blinked at his reaction, tilting her head slightly with amusement. She noted that he seemed tense. How could he not be? The most beautiful girl he had ever seen was lying next to him, completely unbothered by the circumstances. Rias chuckled softly at his expression and pushed herself up slightly, the sheets shifting against her skin. She asked if he was feeling all right, her voice gentle. Issei finally blurted out a question he could no longer hold back, his hands gripping the blanket tightly. He was a whirlwind of confusion and panic, desperately trying to focus. Rias regarded him for a moment, her smile warm and patient. She told him that he belonged to her now. His breath caught in his throat at her words. He echoed her statement, unsure of what he had just heard. Rias confirmed it with a nod, and Issei's heart raced, the weight of her declaration pressing down on him. He struggled to make sense of it all, feeling as if he were trying to catch smoke with his bare hands. He asked her what she meant, his voice low and uncertain. Rias's smile softened, and a knowing gleam appeared in her sapphire-blue eyes. She shifted slightly, propping herself up on one elbow, and explained that he belonged to her now. Issei's stomach twisted at the word belong. It echoed in his mind, rattling around like a loose screw. He stammered, shaking his head in confusion. Rias gently interrupted him, explaining that he had been dying the night before. If it weren't for her timely intervention and his strange healing factor, he would have been lost. The realization hit him like a freight train. He recalled the memory of the light spear piercing his chest, the pain, and the sensation of life slipping away. But then, there was something else, a heat that had mended his wounds in an unnatural way. He instinctively touched his chest, expecting to find scars or the ache of a fresh wound, but his skin was smooth and untouched, as if nothing had ever happened. He muttered about the healing factor, confused about his own abilities. Rias's piercing blue eyes studied him closely, as if searching for something beneath his confusion. She revealed that he wasn't supposed to survive the spear and that something had already started pulling him back from the brink when she found him. Issei's mind reeled at her words. Something had been pulling him back? The image of the blades and the merging of flesh and steel flickered in his mind. He wondered if that was him. He asked her how this was possible and what he had become. Rias's gaze softened, but her words remained firm as she explained that he was now a devil, reincarnated with one of her evil pieces. She pressed a cool hand gently over his chest, revealing that whatever power was inside him was something different, something she had never seen before. The realization sank deeper into Issei. Not only had he died, but something ancient and foreign had awakened within him even before Rias had saved his life. The memory of the crimson gauntlet and the dragon's emerald eyes flashed in his mind, and the name Draig echoed through his thoughts like a heartbeat. Rias's hand lingered for a moment longer before she pulled back, giving him space to process. She explained that he belonged to her now because she had saved him, but she sensed that there was more to his story than even she understood. Issei muttered dryly about how horrifying that was, rubbing the back of his neck as the weight of her words settled over him. The idea of being resurrected and owned by a devil wasn't how he had pictured his high school life going. But before he could spiral further, another thought struck him. He glanced at Rias, still draped across the bed, her scarlet hair fanned out like a halo of fire against the pillow, her porcelain skin glowing against the pale fabric. He blurted out a question about why she was in his bed. Rias arched an elegant brow, clearly amused by his sudden shift in priorities. She playfully pointed out that this was her room, not his. Issei blinked, taking in the unfamiliar space for the first time. The luxurious furnishings, the deep crimson curtains, and the ornate chandelier overhead were far too extravagant to belong to him. He stammered in disbelief, realizing she had brought him to her room. Rias chuckled softly, explaining that he was now part of her household and it was only natural for her to keep an eye on her new servant. His face turned beet red at the word, servant. He sputtered, gesturing wildly, questioning why she had to put him in her bed. Rias tilted her head, feigning innocence as she explained that physical closeness helps stabilize demonic energy, especially after a resurrection. She added with a smirk that she hadn't heard him complaining the night before. Issei's mind stuttered to a halt, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly as he searched for a witty comeback. Rias Gremory, the most admired girl at Kuo Academy, was no longer just a distant classmate. She was a devil, a high-ranking one at that, who had saved his life and now sat beside him as if waking up together was the most ordinary thing in the world. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat louder than the last. The words were on the tip of his tongue, something clever to break the tension, but instead, he expressed concern about his parents, wondering if they were worried sick. The question hung in the air, jarringly mundane compared to the sheer insanity of the situation. For a moment, Rias blinked at him, clearly caught off guard by the sudden shift in topic. Then, her lips curled into an amused smile, as if she found his panic both endearing and entertaining. She echoed his concern, her voice smooth and calm, as if this was a perfectly normal conversation to be having in their current circumstances. She reassured him that she had taken care of it. Issei's eyes widened at her words, feeling a wave of unease wash over him. His mind immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusions. Were his parents okay? Had she manipulated them in some way? He blurted out his fears, his voice rising in pitch as he questioned what she meant by taken care of it. Rias let out a soft, musical laugh, shaking her head, her scarlet hair cascading over her bare shoulders. She explained that she had simply informed them he was staying over at a friend's house for the night, using a little demonic suggestion to smooth over the unusual circumstances. Issei gaped at her, trying to process that information. He accused her of messing with their heads, though disbelief dulled the sharpness of his words. Rias rolled her eyes playfully, propping herself up on one elbow, the sheets slipping slightly down her body. She assured him it was harmless and that his parents were perfectly fine. She emphasized that she wasn't in the habit of hurting humans unless absolutely necessary. He stared at her, still trying to wrap his head around everything. The fact that she could so casually manipulate his parents' memories sent a shiver down his spine. However, the alternative explaining all of this to them wasn't exactly a better option. He groaned, dragging a hand down his face, feeling overwhelmed by the absurdity of his situation. Just yesterday, he had been a regular guy, and now he was somehow involved in a world far beyond his understanding. Rias's smile softened as she met his eyes, her teasing demeanor fading just a touch. She told him he was more than just a devil's servant. He had been given a second chance, a new life. Her gaze sharpened slightly, her tone taking on a more serious edge as she conveyed that he was meant for something far greater than an ordinary life. Issei blinked, her words echoing in his mind like a distant bell. The second chance. A new life. It sounded dramatic, like something out of a manga or a fantasy game, but the conviction in Rias's voice made it feel real. Her deep sapphire eyes bore into his with an intensity that made his chest tighten. Gone was the playful teasing, replaced by something far more profound. There was a weight behind her words, as if she knew something he didn't, as if she could see a future still hidden from him. Those words struck a chord deep within him. It wasn't just the gravity of what she said, it was the strange sense of familiarity that tugged at the edges of his mind, as if he had heard something similar before. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and excitement swirling together in his gut. Part of him wanted to laugh it off, to deny the crazy turn his life had taken. But another part, a quieter, more instinctive part, believed her. He finally managed to ask what she meant by greater, his voice hoarse, as if the word itself was too big to speak aloud. Rias's smile returned, tinged with pride or perhaps expectation. She explained that his life was about to change dramatically. He had stepped into a world far more dangerous and extraordinary than he could have ever imagined, and whether he was ready or not, he was now a part of it. He swallowed hard, trying to process everything: the devil sitting beside him, the strange power stirring deep within, and the image of that crimson gauntlet burned into his memory. He didn't know what his future held, but one thing was clear: there was no going back. As soon as Issei left her room, Rias let out a soft sigh of relief and slumped back onto her bed. The confident, teasing facade she had maintained melted away, leaving only exhaustion in its wake. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment to relax as the lingering tension eased from her muscles. It had taken everything she had not to let her fatigue show while he was still there. The truth was, reincarnating him had drained her far more than she'd expected. Transforming a human into a devil was no small feat, but Issei's case had been different and more difficult. Even with her power, the process had pushed her to her limits. And yet, despite how taxing it had been, she couldn't deny the thrill it stirred within her. Something about him, something buried deep, was unlike anything she had ever encountered. He shouldn't have survived the damage his body had taken. And yet, here he was, alive and adapting faster than any newly reincarnated devil had any right to. Intrigued, she mused, her lips curving into a soft, satisfied smile. "What other secrets are you hiding, my darling pawn?" The playful thought sent a shiver of anticipation through her as she reached across the bed, her fingers brushing against the sheets he had used. Without thinking, she drew the fabric close to her face, the faint warmth of his presence still lingering. A slow breath escaped her lips as she inhaled softly, the faint scent of him wrapping around her like a comforting embrace, a reminder that after all this time, Issei Hyoudou was finally hers. No more stolen glances across the school courtyard. No more pretending she wasn't watching him from afar. The boy who had unknowingly caught her attention, her pawn, was now bound to her in a way no one else could be. And it was all thanks to that reckless fallen angel. Her fingers tightened slightly around the sheet as a glimmer of satisfaction curled in her chest. That woman thought she could simply discard him like trash. A mistake Rias would make sure she regretted. Still, the thought of that Yuma left a bitter taste in her mouth. It wasn't just about Issei, this was her territory, and the idea of a rogue fallen angel wandering through Kuo, endangering the humans under her watch, was unacceptable. The fact that she had already taken action against one of her juniors only made things worse. If Rias didn't handle this soon, more innocent lives could be lost, and the last thing she wanted was to see another person suffer because she hesitated. The warm water cascaded against Issei's skin, washing away whatever grime and tension still clung to his body. Steam curled around him, the faint scent of soap filling the air as he worked the lather across his arms and chest. Despite the soothing warmth, his mind refused to settle. Yuma. The name echoed in his thoughts, sharp and painful. The memory came unbidden, the cold, merciless glint in her eyes as she smiled sweetly right before striking him. His hand moved on its own, fingers ghosting over the spot where the weapon had pierced him. The wound was gone, healed as though it had never been there, but the phantom ache still lingered beneath his skin. A frown crept across his face as he recalled the excruciating pain, the way it had burned through him like wildfire, raw and unyielding as his body forcibly stitched itself back together. And not with flesh or muscle, but with blades that had emerged from within, knitting his broken form like jagged steel threads. Just thinking about it sent an involuntary shiver crawling down his spine. It didn't make sense. None of it did. Drake had tried to explain it, or at least, he had tried to start explaining it, but the dragon's words still rattled around in his head without fully settling. Something about his soul being unusual, a merging of powers that wasn't supposed to exist. Apparently, wielding the boosted gear was already a rare enough fate on its own, but whatever had happened to him during his near-death experience had awakened something else. Apparently, it was called Unlimited Blade Works, though even Drake didn't seem entirely sure of what that meant. A reality marble, as Drake called it, an ability tied not to his body, but to the very core of his soul. A world forged from his thoughts, a reflection of his inner self made manifest. And yet, it wasn't whole. Not yet. It was still forming. No, that wasn't right. It was reforming, changing in ways Drake claimed were highly unusual. As if the world within him was breaking apart and rebuilding itself to better reflect who he was now. And if the dragon was to be believed, that process had only just begun. The implications were dizzying. Was this a side effect of becoming a devil? Of dying and being reborn? Or was it something else entirely, something that had always been buried deep inside him, just waiting for the right moment to emerge? And yet, despite the confusion swirling in his head, there was a strange sense of familiarity about it all. The blades, their weight, their names, he hadn't needed to be told what they were. He had known. As if they had always been there, hidden beneath the surface, lingering quietly in the deepest corners of his soul. And now, they were rising. He dragged a hand through his wet hair, water dripping down his face as frustration gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. What did it even mean? Was this just part of being a devil now, some weird quirk of his new existence? Or was it something else entirely, something that had been inside him long before Rias saved his life? No matter how much he tried to wrap his head around it, the answers remained frustratingly out of reach. Every time he thought he was starting to understand, a new question would rear its head, dragging him further down the rabbit hole. With a heavy sigh, he shut off the water and stepped out of the shower, steam curling around him as the cooler air touched his skin. Grabbing a towel, he wrapped it securely around his waist, the soft fabric clinging to his damp form. As much as he wanted to stay under the hot spray, hoping the water might somehow wash away his confusion, he couldn't hide out in the bathroom forever, especially as a guest in someone else's home. And what a home it was! The Gremory estate, no, mansion, was on a whole different level from anything he was used to. Just thinking about how easily Rias had swept him into this new world made his head spin. One day he was an ordinary high schooler. The next, he was a devil serving under the most popular girl at Kuo Academy. And now? He wasn't even sure what he was anymore. Issei ran a hand over his chest absent-mindedly, fingers brushing against the smooth skin where the spear had pierced him. There was no scar, no trace, nothing to prove he had died except the gnawing awareness that he had changed, and there was no going back. He shook his head, deciding not to dwell on it for now. Quickly drying himself off, he hung the towel over his shoulders and grabbed a fresh set of clothes that Rias had kindly left for him while he was in the shower. The simple gesture was appreciated. She was truly going out of her way to ensure his comfort. Still, as much as he valued her kindness, it didn't change the fact that his entire world had been turned upside down. There were still many things he needed to figure out, and standing around brooding wouldn't bring him any closer to answers. If anything, it would only amplify the questions in his mind. With a determined shake of his head, he slipped into the clothes a plain black t-shirt and a pair of comfortable workout shorts and stretched his arms above his head. His muscles ached faintly, a reminder that even with his devil-enhanced healing, the trauma of dying and being reborn was something his body had not entirely forgotten. He needed to move, to work out some of the tension gnawing at him before his thoughts spiraled again. Thus, he spent the rest of his morning going through his daily exercises. By the time he finished, the sun had fully risen, casting warm light across the estate. His muscles ached in a way that was both familiar and grounding. At least it was something normal amidst the whirlwind of everything else that had changed. Taking a deep breath, he made his way toward the dining room, the scent of freshly cooked breakfast guiding him. He expected to find Rias there. After all, it was her house, but he was surprised to see the entire occult research club gathered around the table. His steps faltered at the doorway. They were all here. He recognized most of them, of course. It was hard not to, given their reputations at Kuo Academy. But seeing them like this together, casual and comfortable, was different. Seated at the head of the table was Rias, her crimson hair glowing softly in the morning light. She exuded the same grace and confidence she always did, but there was something warmer now, more relaxed. She glanced up as he entered, offering a smile that was both welcoming and reassuring. To her right sat Akino Himejima. Even in a casual setting, she was breathtaking, long black hair cascading down her back, her usual serene smile in place. Issei had crossed paths with her a few times in the hallways of Kuo, and the rumors of her being the ultimate Yamato Nadeshiko weren't an exaggeration. But beneath the gentle exterior, there was something unsettling. A spark of mischief danced in her violet eyes as she poured tea with delicate precision. And then there was Mordred Kiba, the infamous Knight of Kuro. He had heard the stories everyone had. A rough-edged tomboy with a sharp tongue and an even sharper sword. She leaned back in her chair, one arm draped lazily over the backrest, exuding pure confidence. Her blonde hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, and her outfit short denim shorts, a cropped sports top, and a crimson jacket hanging loosely from her shoulders made her look more like a street brawler than an honor student. Her black combat boots tapped absently against the floor, and when her sharp green eyes locked onto his, a smirk tugged at her lips. She greeted him with a low, cocky tone, remarking that it was about time he showed up and jokingly suggesting that Rias had scared him off. Issei swallowed, trying to push past the awkwardness settling in his chest, explaining that he had been finishing his workout. Yuko leaned forward with a wolfish grin, teasing him about hiding from them, claiming that most guys couldn't handle so much excitement in one room. Before he could respond, a quiet voice cut through the teasing. Kaneko Tojo, small and quiet, sat at the far end of the table, nibbling methodically on a stack of pancakes. She didn't look up, but Issei felt the weight of her observation. Kaneko was famous in her own right, Kuo Academy's mascot, as some called her. Beneath her cute appearance and petite frame, there was an intensity to her, something cold and unreadable. Yuko muttered a playful retort, but it lacked any real bite. Issei shifted awkwardly, feeling like an outsider intruding on something private. These people weren't just students, they were something else entirely. And now, by some twist of fate, he was one of them. Rias gently broke the tension, inviting him to sit down and get to know everyone properly. She suggested that some introductions were in order, or rather, reintroductions. Her voice was warm and inviting, making it seem perfectly normal, as if he wasn't sitting across from some of the most intimidating people at Kuo Academy. Despite the calm facade, Issei could feel the subtle weight of her authority in the room, a reminder that, no matter how casual this breakfast seemed, these people were more than just students. And now, he was one of them. He shifted awkwardly in his seat, eyes flicking across the table as Rias gestured toward the others with a graceful wave of her hand. She began with a soft smile, introducing herself as Rias Gremory, his king. There was a playful lilt in her tone, but beneath it lay a quiet seriousness. No matter how kind she was to him, that one fact wouldn't change: he belonged to her now. Feeling a familiar heat creep up his neck, Issei nodded slowly. It still felt strange to think of someone his age as his master, but there was no point in denying it. Rias continued, turning slightly to introduce Akino Himejima as her queen, noting that he had probably seen her around. Issei blurted out his recognition, realizing that she was considered one of Koa's great ladies alongside Rias and Mordred. Akino chuckled softly, teasing him about sounding like quite the admirer already. Her voice was smooth, but there was an undeniable teasing edge beneath it. Issei swallowed hard, trying to keep his composure as Akino's presence made it difficult to think straight. The graceful way she carried herself, the calm smile that hinted at something deeper, and those violet eyes that seemed to see through everything made it challenging to maintain his focus. They had crossed paths a few times, he thought, scratching the back of his head in uncertainty. Rias explained that Akino handled most of the club's duties alongside her, clearly amused by his reaction. She mentioned that Aquino was always willing to lend a hand but advised him to be careful about what he asked for. A hint of mischief curled at the edges of Aquino's smile, leaving Issei unsure if it was meant to be reassuring or a warning. Rias gestured toward the blonde lounging in her chair, introducing her as Yuko Kiba, her knight. The girl corrected her, stating she preferred to be called Mordred, stretching her arms behind her head and reminding Rias not to forget that. Issei blinked at her boldness. While Aquino's presence felt smooth and elegant, Mordred's was like raw electricity. He had heard the stories about the Knight of Kuo, the strongest swordswoman in school, and the girl no one dared to provoke unless they wanted to face serious consequences. Seeing her up close was a different experience entirely. Finally, Rias gestured to the far end of the table, where a small figure was quietly focused on her breakfast. This was Kaneko Tojo, her rook. The white-haired girl barely glanced up, her amber eyes briefly meeting Issei's before returning to her pancakes. She remained silent. Issei muttered that she was quieter than he expected. Rias patiently explained that Kaneko was more of a listener than a talker but warned him not to let her size fool him. There was no one tougher. Issei had heard the rumors about her strength, how she had once lifted a vending machine with one hand, and the countless stories of those who had crossed her only to regret it immediately. It was strange to reconcile those tales with the quiet girl calmly eating breakfast, yet there was something about her presence that hinted at the truth. Kaneko softly stated she would be watching him, her tone flat and unreadable. He nearly choked on his breath, unsure how to respond. Rias assured him she was joking, though Issei wasn't entirely convinced. Kaneko added a quiet, maybe, causing him to slump a little lower in his chair, realizing just how out of his depth he truly was. Each of them, Aquino, Mordred, and Kaneko, felt like they belonged to a different world, strong and confident, clearly accustomed to the supernatural chaos. And somehow he was supposed to fit into that? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. His life had already been turned upside down once, and now it felt like it was spinning all over again. But as he tried to wrap his head around everything, something nagged at him, a detail he couldn't ignore. Suddenly, he sat up a little straighter and asked why Rias referred to them like they were chess pieces. Rias blinked in surprise, caught off guard by the question. He noticed a flicker of amusement in her expression, but there was also curiosity, as if she hadn't expected him to catch on so quickly. She acknowledged his observation, leaning back slightly in her chair, her voice carrying an air of approval. Issei snorted, rolling his eyes as he reached for the cereal box. It was hard not to notice how obvious it was. He poured himself a bowl, trying to ignore the feeling of her eyes still on him. He pointed out that she had called Aquino her queen, Mordred her knight, and Kaneko her rook, jokingly asking if there was a bishop hiding around somewhere. Aquino remarked that he was smart and observant, her tone playful, and she expressed that she was starting to like him. Issei shifted in his seat, unsure if her words were a compliment or just another way to tease him. The heat rising to his face was not helping his situation. Rias, meanwhile, seemed genuinely pleased by his deduction. She explained that it wasn't just a theme they picked for fun. Devils like them operated through a system known as the evil pieces, a structure based on chess. Issei echoed the term, raising an eyebrow. Rias nodded, explaining that each piece corresponded to a particular role and granted certain abilities. As a king, she was in charge. The queen was the most versatile and powerful, capable of balancing offense, defense, and support. The knights prioritized speed and agility, while rooks excelled in raw power and defense. Bishops were magic specialists, and then there were the pawns. She trailed off meaningfully, her gaze settling on him. A sinking feeling pooled in Issei's stomach as he pointed a spoon at himself, realizing he was the pawn. Rias confirmed this, her voice light but firm, advising him not to underestimate the pawn's potential. She explained that in chess, a pawn may seem weak at first, but if it reaches the other side of the board, it can become any piece it wants. Issei finished her thought, realizing the implication. Rias smiled warmly, emphasizing that he had the same potential. Pawns may start at the bottom, but they could surpass all other pieces under the right conditions. With enough determination, even a pawn could reach the other side of the board and become something far greater. Her words stirred something inside him, a mix of curiosity and apprehension. He had never considered himself special before. If anything, he was painfully average. Yet here she was, telling him he had the power to be something more. It felt strange but good. Leaning back in his seat, he asked if that meant there were other pawns running around or if he was her first. Rias shook her head, her crimson hair brushing softly against her shoulders. She assured him he was and would always be her only pawn. The certainty in her voice caught him off guard. There was no hesitation, no room for misinterpretation, just a simple, absolute truth. Confusion flickered across his face as he questioned what that even meant and why it was only him. Before he could press further, Rias continued, her tone shifting to something more serious. She explained that depending on how powerful the person she wanted to reincarnate was, she might need to use one or more pieces to bring them back. Most people only required 1 or 2 pieces at most. She paused, letting that sink in before revealing the bombshell that he required all 8 of her pawn pieces. Issei's spoon clattered against the side of his bowl as his mind struggled to process this information. All 8? That seemed like far too much. Rias chuckled softly at Issei's reaction, her gaze steady and thoughtful. She mused to herself that the question of what made him special was intriguing. At first glance, he appeared to be an ordinary human, but she suspected it had to do with his sacred gear. Issei stiffened at her words, his mind immediately focusing on the boosted gear he had recently discovered. Was that the reason she had used all 8 of her pawn pieces to bring him back? The idea made sense to him. Drake had informed him that sacred gears were rare and powerful, but was his really so extraordinary that it warranted such an effort from someone like Rias Gremry? He leaned back in his seat, trying to process everything. Until recently, his biggest concerns revolved around surviving high school and his unsuccessful attempts to get a girlfriend. Nothing in his life indicated he was destined for greatness. Yet, here he was, reincarnated as a devil, sitting across from some of the most popular girls at Kuo Academy, being told he might possess something so significant that it had altered the entire reincarnation process. Issei let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He wondered what this meant for him. If his sacred gear was indeed special, what would happen next? Rias' expression softened, though there was a weight behind her words. She explained that for now, nothing would change. He would continue attending school as usual and join the occult research club after classes. In time, they would help him understand his power and how to use it properly. Issei felt a sense of relief wash over him. Despite the strangeness and overwhelming nature of his situation, the prospect of finally getting answers was comforting. He wasn't one to shy away from challenges, and he was already deeply involved in the supernatural world. Before he could say anything else, his phone buzzed against his leg. He pulled it out and saw a new message from his sister, Miyu, asking where he was and mentioning that Ilya was worried. He sighed softly, running a hand through his hair. Of course, they would notice his absence. He usually returned home on time, and while Miyu liked to keep her cool, Ilya was less adept at hiding her worries. He could easily imagine Ilya pacing by the front door, anxiously checking her phone, while Miyu, the calm one, was likely managing the situation. He could picture Ilya bouncing between frustration and panic, convinced he had fallen into a ditch or been kidnapped. Meanwhile, Miyu would be the composed sister, but he knew her patience was wearing thin if she was the one reaching out. He quickly typed a reply, letting them know he was on his way and to keep Ilya calm. The response came almost immediately, confirming that it was too late for that. Despite himself, he let out a quiet laugh. It sounded about right. Ilya would have been talking nonstop since he missed his usual check-in, and Miyu would already be managing the situation. He knew they could handle themselves, but guilt settled in his chest. After everything they had been through together, the last thing he wanted was to make them worry. Rias interrupted his thoughts, asking if everything was all right. He explained that it was just his sisters checking in and that he usually didn't stay out this late without informing them. He felt he should head home before they sent out a search party. Rias tilted her head slightly, her curiosity evident. He shrugged, warmth creeping into his voice as he admitted that they were a handful but were still his family. He tried to look out for them. Aquino chuckled softly, teasing him about his responsibility. Issei leaned back slightly and flashed her a playful grin, enjoying the banter. He felt more at ease around them, even if part of him still felt like an outsider. Aquino's eyes sparkled with amusement as she rested her chin on her hand, playfully wondering about the surprises he might be hiding. Issei raised an eyebrow but shook his head with a laugh, insisting he really needed to leave before they began a search party for him. He imagined the chaos that would ensue if he took too long. Ilya would likely start calling everyone she could think of, while Miyu would calmly draft a detailed search plan. He enjoyed the banter but didn't want to imagine the chaos waiting for him if he let their imaginations run wild. With that in mind, he stood up and made his way toward the front door. The sound of his footsteps echoed softly as he grabbed his shoes from the neatly arranged rack. He slipped them on with ease, already planning the fastest route home. Just as he was about to leave, Rias called out to him. Her tone was soft yet authoritative, causing him to pause mid-step. He glanced back to see her seated at the table, her crimson hair cascading over her shoulders. She radiated confidence, but there was something earnest beneath it. She requested that he return in the evening, stating she had something important to show him. The way she said it made the air feel heavier, as if whatever she had planned was significant. Issei's curiosity piqued, but he kept his expression neutral. As much as he wanted answers, he sensed that this was not something she was willing to rush. He agreed, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of questions still circling in his mind. Ria's smile softened, the warmth in her expression easing some of the tension he hadn't realized he was holding. She promised to fill him in a little more in the evening, her tone gentle and reassuring. With that, she turned her attention back to her tea, as though the conversation hadn't just shifted the foundation of his reality. Issei lingered for a moment longer, his thoughts buzzing with everything he had learned, or rather, everything he hadn't learned. Pressing her for more answers wouldn't do any good right now. If Rias was willing to explain things later, he could wait for now. With a small nod, he turned toward the door, calling over his shoulder that he would see them later, lifting a hand in a casual wave to the rest of the club. Aquino responded first, her voice smooth and teasing as always, saying they would be waiting. Ko gave him a brief nod, her usual cool demeanor in place, though there was a flicker of curiosity in her gaze as she mentioned not to keep them waiting too long. Kaneko barely looked up from the small snack she had started nibbling on, but her quiet acknowledgement was enough to let him know she had been paying attention. He chuckled under his breath at how normal the scene felt, despite the fact that nothing in his life felt remotely normal anymore. Shaking his head, he stepped out the door, letting it swing shut behind him. The warm breeze outside was a sharp contrast to the weight lingering in his chest, as if the air itself was trying to convince him that everything was still normal, that he was still normal. But no matter how much he tried to shake it off, the truth clung to him like a shadow. He wasn't the same person he had been just a few days ago, and there was no going back. With a sigh, he pulled his phone out again to check the time. If he took a couple of shortcuts through the park and cut across the old footbridge, he could probably make it home in 10 minutes, maybe 6 if he pushed himself and threw in a little parkour. The thought made him smile. It wouldn't be the first time he had vaulted over fences to shave off a few minutes. After everything that had happened, burning off some energy didn't sound like a bad idea. He slid his phone back into his pocket and picked up his pace, his feet moving on autopilot as his mind continued to churn. The morning had given him more questions than answers, and he still had more questions he wanted to ask. Drake had given him some insight into what was happening to him internally before providing a brief summary of the factions. Granted, Drake had admitted that his knowledge was slightly outdated and obscure at best. The dragon hadn't spent his time worrying about the political landscape when he was alive. Fighting and destruction had been more his speed. But even with the gaps in his understanding, the information was still useful. It offered Issei a glimpse of the bigger picture and just how far out of his depth he really was. Before long, Issei found himself nearing his family home. The familiar sight of the old Japanese-style manor greeted him as he rounded the corner. The dark, sloping tiled roofs stood out against the afternoon sky, casting long shadows across the outer wall that wrapped protectively around the property. The gentle rustling of leaves and the faint chirping of birds filled the air, making the entire place feel calm, deceptively calm, considering the storm of thoughts still swirling inside his head. Issei let out a slow breath as he approached the front gate, the heavy wooden frame and traditional tiled awning standing tall and sturdy. The faint creak of the wood echoed softly as he slid the gate open, stepping into the courtyard. The earthy scent of the garden greeted him, first fresh soil and the faint sweetness of blooming flowers. Neatly arranged stone pathways cut through the grass, leading toward the main house. Tall bamboo and carefully pruned trees stood in the corners, offering patches of shade. His feet followed the well-worn path toward the veranda, where the sliding shoji doors awaited. He kicked off his shoes at the step, the polished wood cool beneath his socked feet as he stepped inside. The air shifted instantly, quieter, softer, filled with the faint aroma of tame mats and the lingering scent of tea. From here, he could see the heart of the house, the living room, where a low table sat neatly in the center, a few cushions still scattered around it from the morning. The kitchen was tucked just behind it, faint clinks and clatters hinting that someone was already up and moving. He took a deep breath before announcing his arrival. A moment of silence followed, then Ilya rushed toward him, her silver hair bouncing with every step, her crimson eyes wide with relief and just a hint of accusation. She expressed her worry about his absence, mentioning that he hadn't answered her texts and that she thought something had happened. Issei raised his hands in a placating gesture, trying to fight back a smile as he reassured her that he was fine. Ilya pouted, crossing her arms in frustration, insisting that he could have at least informed them. Miyu, standing in the doorway with her composed demeanor, remarked that he had been out longer than usual and that they had calculated possible routes home, noting he hadn't taken any of them. Issei chuckled softly, scratching the back of his neck and teasing that he liked to keep them on there. Miyu raised an eyebrow, unimpressed, while Ilya huffed in agreement, insisting that he should tell them if something happened. Despite their scolding, warmth bloomed in his chest. For all the craziness in his life right now, having them worry about him like this was comforting. He relented, lifting his hands in mock surrender and promising to text next time, which brightened Ilya's face into a brilliant smile. Miyu simply nodded, her expression softening ever so slightly. Issei felt a wave of warmth wash over him as he stepped into the familiar home. The cozy interior was filled with little details that made it feel lived in. The faint scent of freshly brewed tea lingered in the air, and a half-folded blanket lay on the couch, a testament to Ilya's habit of getting comfortable while watching her favorite shows. Soft light filtered through the shoji screens, casting gentle shadows and creating an atmosphere of peace that he had missed more than he realized. He turned to the girls, curious about their parents. He wondered where Mom and Dad were, as well as Liz and Sella. Ilya's face brightened, her energy bouncing back. She excitedly informed him that their parents had gone on another field trip, while Liz and Sella were out grocery shopping. She practically danced around him, her excitement palpable. Issei chuckled, shaking his head at the thought of their parents on yet another adventure. He imagined them chasing after some ancient artifact or unraveling another mystery that would turn their lives upside down. Ilya giggled and twirled in front of him, sharing that their dad had called it an important research expedition, while their mom had humorously dismissed it as a fancy way of saying she was bored and needed an adventure. Issei couldn't help but smile at their parents' antics. His brow furrowed slightly as he pondered why Liz and Sella were grocery shopping again. It seemed they had just restocked the pantry a few days ago. Miyu, calm and steady as always, explained that Sella wanted to prepare something special for dinner but had realized she lacked some key ingredients. She had convinced Liz to accompany her, likely to prevent her from buying too much. Issei chuckled awkwardly, picturing Sella meticulously planning dinner only to discover she was missing something vital. He could easily imagine Liz reluctantly tagging along to keep her from going overboard. Ilya added that Sella had been muttering about maintaining proper household standards when they left, rolling her eyes playfully. She suspected Sella just needed an excuse to fuss over something. Issei agreed, his smile widening. He knew Sella's fussing was her way of showing care, and Liz probably enjoyed stirring up a little mischief while they were out. Miyu paused at her doorway, glancing back at them. She mentioned that their parents should be back soon, so they wouldn't have to wait long for Sella's next lecture. Issei exaggerated his response, playfully rolling his eyes as he lamented the impending reminder of his perceived shortcomings. Yet, there was no real annoyance in his voice. It was the familiar warmth that came from years of receiving Sella's well-meaning scoldings. With a shrug, he decided to head to the kitchen. Since his fate seemed sealed, he figured he might as well whip up a quick snack while they waited. Ilya's face lit up with enthusiasm, and she eagerly declared her hunger, skipping after him and urging him not to hold back. Miyu lingered for a moment, watching her siblings with a faint smile. Despite Issei's teasing, it was clear he cherished being home, slipping easily back into their routines as if he belonged there just as much as anyone else. As Issei rummaged through the pantry, he playfully accused Ilya of trying to butter him up so Sella would go easy on him. He knew he was a soft touch for her puppy dog eyes. In the bustling mall, Ilya's voice rang out as she tugged insistently at Issei's arm, causing him to stumble slightly. He muttered that he wasn't a sled, but Ilya either didn't hear him or chose to ignore it entirely as she weaved through the crowd with determination. Her pale hair bounced behind her, and the frilly hem of her dress swayed with each step. She excitedly shared that there was a shop just past the escalators with the cutest keychains, which Miyu had spotted the previous week. Issei cast a long-suffering look at Miyu, who trailed behind them with her shopping bag in hand. Miyu explained that the keychains were handmade and shaped like cats in teacups. Issei relented, allowing himself to be swept up in their excitement, which made the girls squeal in delight. Ilya was practically vibrating with joy, promising that he would love the keychains. After that, they could visit the bookstore, where Miyu wanted to pick up the next volume of her mystery series. Issei chuckled softly to himself, not minding being dragged around if it meant seeing the two of them smile. These quiet, peaceful moments had become rare, and he appreciated every second of it. If chasing after his energetic sister through the shopping district was the price for that peace, then he was more than willing to pay it. As they rounded the corner past the escalator, Issei fell into step beside Ilya and encouraged her to lead the way to the keychains. Her grin was infectious, and she declared that Operation Cute Keychains was officially a go, moving her fist into the air with dramatic flair, turning heads nearby. Her enthusiasm brought a warm smile to Issei's face as he watched her bounce with barely contained excitement. It was rare to see her this animated in public, making moments like this all the more precious. He was about to comment when he felt a gentle tug at his sleeve. Glancing to his side, he saw Miyu standing there, her expression calm as always, though a slight crease marred her brow. He acknowledged her with a nod, his attention still on Ilya, who was scouting ahead with determination. Miyu informed him that she needed to use the restroom, her voice soft yet direct. Issei blinked, momentarily pulled from his thoughts, and nodded quickly, shifting gears effortlessly. He mentioned the restroom near the food court, just past the pretzel stand they had walked by earlier, gesturing down the path. Miyu followed his gesture with her eyes and nodded in acknowledgement. He offered to wait for her in the food court, smiling in a way that conveyed gentle responsibility rather than authority. He added that it was close enough that she wouldn't miss them and teased that Ilya might not last long without sugar. Ilya, overhearing him despite her focus elsewhere, playfully called out, reminding him she had heard his comment. Issei smirked, knowing she was meant to. Miyu let out a quiet laugh and turned to go, her steps composed. He added a note of caution, telling her to be careful, to which she replied with a brief glance back before disappearing into the crowd. Issei watched her for a moment longer than necessary, ensuring she was on the right path, before releasing a breath and turning his attention back to Ilya, who was now scouting the food court from their vantage point. He suggested they get some food, smiling as he effortlessly lifted Ilya onto his shoulders. Ilya celebrated her elevation, throwing her arms up like a general surveying her kingdom. Issei humorously lamented his decision, though a grin betrayed his true feelings as he navigated through the bustling shoppers. Ilya pointed out various stalls, excitedly mapping out their culinary strategy. The food court buzzed with activity families gathered around tables, teenagers clustered in noisy groups, and the sounds of trays clattering and grills sizzling blended into a lively hum of conversation and laughter. The enticing aromas of sweet, fried, and savory foods filled the air, tempting even the most patient of souls. As Issei scanned the selection, he remarked on the mission objective, sweet or salty. Ilya, without hesitation, declared both, emphasizing a balanced diet plan that involved sampling from at least 3 different stalls. Issei chuckled, shaking his head at her logic, recognizing it as a recipe for a sugar rush. Ilya grinned mischievously, unbothered by his teasing. She explained that a bit of salt would keep them grounded while a lot of sweetness would lift their spirits. He relented, pretending to surrender as he guided them toward a quieter part of the courtyard, where a lone takoyaki stand sat beside a colorful smoothie stall. He carefully set Ilya down at a table, ruffled her hair, and placed their orders before returning with 2 trays balanced in his hands. Ilya's eyes lit up when he placed the tray in front of her, her excitement palpable as she took in the warm scent of freshly cooked takoyaki mingling with the sugary aroma of the crepe beside it. With dramatic flair, she declared her gratitude and eagerly grabbed a toothpick, quickly popping a steaming takoyaki ball into her mouth. Suddenly, a voice at her side made Ilya jump, nearly causing her to choke on the food. She coughed and thumped her chest, glancing up to see Miyu standing there, calm as ever, as if she hadn't just appeared out of nowhere. Ilya admonished her for sneaking up on people, grabbing her drink for a desperate sip. Anticipating his sister's arrival, Issei slid the second tray toward her without missing a beat, offering a small smile as he nodded toward the tray filled with a colorful selection of carriage, rice ball, and a small fruit parfait. Much to Issei's surprise, Sela had been unexpectedly accepting when he and his sisters returned home with an unexpected guest. He had braced himself for a stern lecture or a disapproving glare, but instead, Sela simply nodded and stepped aside to let them in without demanding an explanation. As Asia stepped over the threshold, Sela gestured for her to follow, her tone polite yet efficient. She informed Asia that her room was ready upstairs, leaving Issei momentarily stunned. He exchanged bewildered glances with Ilya, who echoed his disbelief. Sela continued without pausing, explaining that she and Lady Liz had prepared the room earlier that afternoon. Issei opened his mouth, then closed it again, unsure what to say. Asia looked equally surprised, clutching the handle of a bag he hadn't even realized she was carrying. She glanced up at him, seeking reassurance that this was normal. It was anything but normal. Sela never acted without a reason, especially not when it came to preparing guest rooms for strangers. Yet here they were, stepping into the unexpected. Here they were, with Asia being quietly ushered into a neatly prepared guest room complete with fresh linens, fluffed pillows, and a small vase of white daisies on the nightstand. Liz had even lit a soft-scented candle by the window. Issei watched Sela glide across the room, fussing with the curtains as if nothing about this evening was out of the ordinary. At the sound of his voice, the older woman paused for a brief moment, then turned her head to glance over her shoulder at him. Her expression was unreadable for a heartbeat before a subtle, almost amused smile curved at the corners of her lips. Of course they knew she was coming, Sela replied, her tone calm and composed, yet there was a faint warmth in her voice. After all, it was Issei's mother who extended the invitation. Issei blinked, surprise flickering across his face. His mother? Sela nodded once, then turned back to smoothing out the drapes, her fingers brushing over the fabric. She explained that Issei's mother had heard about Asia's circumstances and was furious when she learned that Asia had been expelled. No one so pure should be left to wander alone, especially not someone so young and kind. So, she sent word immediately and made arrangements for Asia to come to Kuo. Sela let out a small hum, tilting her head slightly as a thoughtful look passed over her features. Granted, Asia did arrive a bit earlier than they had anticipated. They expected her sometime next week, not today. Issei let out a quiet breath, his shoulders relaxing just a little as he continued to observe Asia. The girl sat still on the edge of the bed, her small hands gently clasped in her lap, unsure whether to keep holding onto her bag or let it go. Her expression was hard to read, somewhere between confused and overwhelmed as her green eyes flicked back and forth between him and Sela, trying to piece together the quiet conversation they had been having. Then something seemed to click. A spark of recognition lit up in Asia's eyes, and her whole demeanor changed in an instant. She gasped, her mouth parting in surprise, And then an elated smile spread across her face so radiantly that it practically lit up the room. "Wait a minute," she exclaimed, her voice a mixture of disbelief and joy. "You're related to Lady Irisveal." Issei blinked, caught completely off guard. Before he could respond, Asia was already halfway across the room in a blur of motion, her boots softly tapping against the floor as she moved. She stopped just short of him, only to close the final gap by throwing her arms around his torso in a hug that was surprisingly strong for someone so petite. "You know Mom?" Issei asked, eyes wide, his arms hovering in the air for a moment before he awkwardly returned the hug. Asia nodded enthusiastically against his chest, then pulled back just enough to beam up at him. "Of course I do. I met her a few years ago, Lady Irisveal and her husband both. They were visiting a small cathedral in northern Italy at the time, and I happened to be there on a missionary rotation." She let out a soft, nostalgic giggle. She was so elegant and warm, speaking to everyone with such kindness, even the novices. His expression softened as he listened, a fond smile growing on his face. He could almost picture his mother in that cathedral, graceful, kind, offering words of comfort and little jars of homemade jam as if they were the most natural gifts in the world. It sounded just like something Irisveal von Einsborn would do. Always a step ahead. Always thinking of others. But then the smile faded, giving way to a furrowed brow and a tightening in his chest. If his parents had truly gone out of their way to invite Asia here, if his mom had made that promise years ago, then why direct her to the abandoned Kuo church of all places? It didn't make sense. The place had been left to rot for years, and everyone in town knew to steer clear of it. Too many ghost stories and too much history. Not exactly the kind of welcome mat one would leave out for a girl who had just been expelled and had nowhere else to go. Was it a miscommunication? Or maybe they had planned to pick her up there and something changed at the last minute. The thought didn't sit right with him, gnawing quietly at the edges of his mind like a thread waiting to unravel. His mother was many things, but careless wasn't one of them. Sella's voice broke his train of thought. "You should rest," she said, her tone gentler than usual. She stood near the doorway, hands folded in front of her like a quiet sentinel. "It's been a long day for everyone." Asia nodded hesitantly. The adrenaline that had carried her this far was clearly wearing off. Her shoulders drooped, and dark circles were forming beneath her eyes. I think I will," she said quietly, bowing her head slightly in thanks. "Thank you all so much. Really." Ilya and Miyu took that as their cue, each offering their own sleepy goodnight to Asia before shuffling off to their room. Ilya paused at the doorway to wave, while Miyu simply nodded, already half asleep as she leaned against her sister. Issei lingered a moment longer, offering Asia a reassuring smile as she moved toward the bed Sella and Liz had prepared for her. The room was simple but warm, lit softly by the golden hue of a bedside lamp. Fresh linens and a glass of water on the nightstand, everything done with care. He reached over to gently close the door, pausing just before it clicked shut. "If you need anything," he said, "we're just down the hall." Asia blinked at him, then smiled once more. "Good night." "Good night." The door closed with a soft thud, muffling the quiet rustle of blankets as Asia curled beneath the covers in her newly prepared room. A faint floral scent lingered in the air, fresh tatame mats mingling with the subtle traces of chamomile from the tea Issei had sipped earlier. The room, nestled in one of the quieter wings of the estate, was warmly lit by a modest paper lantern in the corner, casting a gentle glow over the shoji walls and polished wooden floors. Outside in the hallway, the stillness of the night settled like a blanket over the household. The long corridor stretched in both directions, lined with carved wooden paneling and illuminated only by low wall sconces. Their amber light flickered gently, casting sleepy shadows across the lacquered floorboards. Somewhere farther down the compound, the soothing splash of the koi pond's waterfall could barely be heard through the open-air walkways connecting the wings of the estate. Issei padded quietly down the hallway, his footsteps muffled by the soft tatami runners beneath his feet. He passed the garden view lounge where the paper doors were slightly ajar, allowing moonlight to spill across the floor. The night air drifted faintly in through the open window panes, cool and clean, carrying the soft rustle of bamboo from the estate's outer grove. Finally reaching his room near the western wing, he slid open the door with practiced ease. The spacious chamber greeted him with familiar stillness, its central futon already laid out beneath the high wooden beams. One wall bore his sword rack and a modest shelf stacked with old notebooks and manga volumes, the only real mess in an otherwise orderly space. With a tired exhale, Issei pulled off his jacket and tossed it lazily over the back of the low chair in the corner. It landed with a soft rustle, briefly disrupting the quiet. He paused, listening. No footsteps, no voices. Just the soft rhythm of night. His mind flicked back to Asia, resting just a few rooms away. It was strange how quickly things had shifted. One moment, she had been a nervous girl with no place to go, and now she was here, under their roof, under his family's care. As he let that thought settle, Issei pulled the thin blanket over his chest and laid back on his futon. The wood above creaked faintly as the old beams adjusted to the cooling air. Moonlight slipped through the narrow cracks in the shutters, striping the floor in silver. He stared up into the shadows for a long moment, letting his mind wander. Eventually, his eyes drifted to his right hand, resting palm up beside him. His lips pressed into a thin line, jaw tight as the weight of a memory resurfaced. Drake's voice echoed in his mind from just a few nights ago, noting how he seemed to have bypassed the usual limitations that allowed him to summon the boosted gear in its standard twice-critical form. Even odder still, it responded when he spoke a certain phrase. Issei wondered what Drake meant by that as he turned his palm upward. For a few seconds, nothing happened, which he half expected. But then, like a crack in reality had opened, an image forced its way into his thoughts, uninvited and sharp in its clarity. It was a gun, specifically a Thompson Contender long-barreled, precise, unmistakably single-shot. Its hammer was drawn back, primed and ready, as if daring him to pull the trigger. It wasn't a weapon he was particularly familiar with, yet he recognized it immediately. The vision pulsed for a heartbeat, frozen in the dark recess of his mind, where it continued to stay, as if waiting for something. He blinked, breath caught in his throat. What was that? Some instinct he didn't recognize stirred at the edge of his awareness. The words surfaced before he could stop them. Trace. The effect was immediate. Thin, crimson lines flared across his skin, racing outward from his heart like veins of molten energy. They pulsed in time with his heartbeat, glowing with a strange, unnatural heat as they crawled along his arms, chest, and legs, intricate, almost circuit-like in design. He barely had time to gasp before a flash of red light engulfed him. It wasn't hot, but it felt like standing in the eye of a storm. The world around him dissolved into light and hum. When the blaze finally receded, Issei lowered his arm and blinked away the spots clouding his vision. Once the spots faded, he realized that his hand felt different. A quick glance revealed that the boosted gear had formed itself around his hand. A shaky chuckle escaped him as the rush of power buzzed through his nerves, but it was short-lived. The strain of the day and the sudden surge of energy came crashing down at once. His body gave out beneath him, the gear vanishing with a soft shimmer as he collapsed back onto his futon. When Issei opened his eyes, he found himself greeted by the sight of a sprawling cavern, vast and ancient, its scale dwarfing anything he could comprehend. The walls were lost in the haze, but the ceiling loomed high above, jagged and sharp in places, softened in others by glowing moss and faint crystal growths that emitted a dull green and red light. The cavern felt alive, not just a place, but a presence. Rows of weapons stood proudly, many driven deep into the rock, some laid in symmetrical arcs as if guarding sacred relics. Between them ran faintly glowing streams of molten energy, like veins of magic pulsing through the stone. Drake's massive form loomed near the cavern wall, his crimson scales catching the faint emerald glow from the moss overhead. Spikes of deep red and gold ran down the length of his serpentine body, each one gleaming like tempered blades beneath the cavern light. His vast wings were folded against his sides, draped like a mantle of living armor. From beneath his heavy brow, sharp green eyes flickering faintly red in the darkness pierced through the gloom, tracking Issei with a quiet intensity. He hadn't spoken or moved, but the sheer weight of his presence pressed on the air itself, ancient, watchful, patient. Issei spoke slowly, his voice barely more than a breath, almost lost in the cavern's vast stillness. His gaze swept across the transformed landscape, the boundless cavern, weapons hovering midair, glowing moss casting an ethereal light from the ceiling far above. It wasn't the open battlefield of his last visit. It was enclosed, ancient, alive. He wondered what had happened. A deep rumble answered him, not threatening but heavy with thought. Drake asked if he didn't remember, tilting his great head, serpentine neck coiling slightly as he regarded his host. Issei frowned, crossing his arms before letting them drop. He glanced around again at the cave that had replaced his former reality, recalling that Drake had told him many things the previous night. Issei felt a weary frustration linger behind his words, exhaustion not of the body, but of the mind. Too much had happened lately, too many changes he hadn't asked for. Drake gave a low, thoughtful hum that resonated through the stone beneath Issei's feet. He explained that the world within Issei was not stagnant just because he was. It evolved with him, reflecting his thoughts, instincts, and even the parts of him he wasn't ready to face yet. Issei looked back at the weapons scattered across the floor and floating overhead. Not just swords, but halberds, spears, bows, shields, sickles, and war fans, each unique, each a reflection of something deeper, emotions, fears, aspirations. He pondered if the changes were a result of his own evolution. Drake clarified that the world was already changing when Issei first arrived, but something had accelerated the process. This place was the core of his being, a manifestation of his soul, a window into his true self. Issei pointed toward a glowing green shape lodged deep into the ground. He questioned if the giant emerald with Avalon floating above it was part of him too. Drake found Issei's calmness curious, expecting more questions or even panic, especially after the overwhelming experience of awakening his powers. Issei rubbed the back of his neck, leaning against a thick broadsword embedded in the ground. He acknowledged the long day full of surprises and pressed Drake for answers. Drake gestured toward the floating sheath above the emerald, recalling when Issei first saw the boosted gear within Unlimited Blade Works. He explained that the boosted gear had been absorbed and integrated into this new reality. Issei's skepticism grew as he learned that he could now store actual weapons within his reality marble, creating a bond with them rather than merely fabricating copies. Issei paused, contemplating the strange jewel pulsing with emerald light. The floating sheath shimmered elegantly, as if waiting to be held. He felt a subtle pull in his chest, something familiar yet foreign, as if a part of him remembered this place. He asked Drake if there was anything else he should know. Drake casually mentioned that the evil pieces used to resurrect him were slowly warping. Issei's disbelief grew as he sought clarification on what that meant. Drake remained calm, explaining that it was nothing lethal. Issei's body was becoming a convergence point for both draconic essence and holy energy from the sheath. The evil pieces were evolving, transforming into something new, what Drake referred to as dragon pieces. He revealed that Issei's heart had transformed into a draconic magic core, which would enhance his resistance to threats that would normally harm a devil or a dragon. Issei placed a hand over his chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath his skin. He expressed his frustration, realizing he was becoming something beyond a devil, a holy dragon chimera. Drake clarified that he was still mostly a devil and the transformation could take years, but if Issei wasn't careful, he could accelerate the process. Issei stared at Drake, feeling a mix of frustration, disbelief, and mild existential dread. It was an exhausting understanding that, of course, this was happening. With his luck, he would be breathing fire and growing scales before the end of the semester. He sighed, acknowledging the situation with a dry thought. He decided to use the time he had left in this realm to plan a day out with the newest addition to his family. It was an attempt at normalcy, a fragile effort to keep his thoughts from spiraling into despair. There was still life to be lived, people he cared about, and things to protect. He refused to let a few new scales or a dragon heart take that away from him. Drake chuckled, amused by Issei's determination. That was fine with him as he turned, walking toward the embedded emerald. His massive form cast flickering shadows across the smooth stone, his tail dragging behind with silent weight. He hoped she would start putting in some practice for her magic circuits. He really didn't want her passing out in the middle of a serious fight just because she overloaded on mana. Before Issei could respond, Draig's body shimmered, his entire frame dissolving into a luminous mist of golden light. The particles drifted toward the jewel like fireflies returning home, vanishing as they touched the gem's surface, absorbed into the emerald's core without a sound. And then, silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the still, expectant quiet of a forge gone momentarily cold. Issei remained seated, letting the quiet settle around him like a weighted blanket. The weapon stood unmoving, yet not lifeless. Each blade and polearm, each shield and arrowhead, thrummed faintly with a resonance he could feel in his bones. Overhead, the bioluminescent moss swayed ever so slightly in the non-existent breeze, their delicate glow sending waves of teal and silver rippling across the stone like moonlight on water. His eyes wandered lazily at first, drifting from weapon to weapon, but the moment his gaze lingered and focused, something shifted. Not in the air, not in the space around him, but inside. Names rose to the surface of his consciousness like bubbles breaking through still water. They were not unfamiliar, but not exactly familiar either. It wasn't learning, it was remembering. A gentle flood of recognition washed over him, as though the truth of each armament had always been there, waiting to be uncovered again. It wasn't like downloading data into a machine. No, that analogy was far too mechanical, too artificial. It was more like reloading a half-forgotten web page, something bookmarked years ago in the back of his mind, left dormant until this exact moment. Names like Bamung, Hrunting, Khalidbog, Gibog, Rulebreaker, Caliban, Ascalon, Excalibur Gallatin, Nine Lives, Excalibur Lionheart, Excalibur Purgatory all rolled out of his head as his gaze passed each one. What was stranger still was that he knew all the weapons here were fakes, copies of the originals aside from Avalon. Something told him that the sheath in front of him was the real deal. Fire surrounded her from all sides, consuming everything with ravenous glee. The flames licked at her skin like wild beasts, each crackling snap a chorus of agony. Smoke stung her eyes, acrid and suffocating, curling down her throat until every breath felt like swallowing needles. Around her, the crowd roared with approval, their voices a thunderous wave of hatred and zeal. Tears slipped down her soot-streaked cheeks, unbidden, carving clean lines through the ash coating her face. Her head hung low, not from weakness, but from something deeper: shame. Not her own, but a shame passed down, inherited through blood or fate, anchored in memory that was both hers and not. Asia had hoped that tonight might be different. That sleep, just once, would bring her something soft. Something warm. But no, of course not. It was always this. Every night, without fail, the same nightmare welcomed her like a cruel lover. Her hands bound by rough rope, her ankles blistering above the pyre, and the crowd, always the crowd, screaming for justice or vengeance or penance. She never knew what they really wanted. Only that they hated her. Sometimes, they were faceless silhouettes, a sea of blackened shadows. Other times, they bore the faces of people she knew: nuns from her orphanage, priests she once trusted, strangers who had smiled at her in the street. But no matter their shapes, their cruelty never changed. She looked up through the rising smoke, vision blurry. The sky above the stake was strangely beautiful, an endless twilight sky of pale gold and dying blue. Almost serene, were it not for the choking heat and splinters of pain crawling across her body. And then it came, that feeling. Familiar. Sickening. Righteous. Rage surged beneath her ribs like a tide breaking through a dam, ancient and hot and personal. Not a scream, not yet, but a pressure mounting behind clenched teeth and fists. Ever since she was expelled from the church, these feelings only intensified: guilt twisted into resentment, love spoiled into doubt, as if she had already known that none of her kindness, none of her prayers, would have ever been enough. The dream never changed. The flame always consumed her. The crowd always screamed. But tonight, something broke. The heat receded, its grip loosening like dying embers curling into ash. The sickly orange gave way to a deep purplish black, not just in the flames, but in the sky, in the very air. The roar of the mob faded into silence, the hateful words Issei into a void that stretched endlessly behind her. When she dared to lift her gaze, she saw the world had changed. The pyre was gone. The stake was gone. Her holy robe was nowhere to be found. In its place, blackened armor, seared at the edges like it had clawed its way from the heart of a dying star. A cape like bruised dusk clung to her shoulders, tattered at the ends, lined with fur that felt too heavy for someone like her. Her gloves were iron-wrought, sharp at the knuckles, and in each trembling hand, she held a lance. They were elegant and terrible, long S of darkness tipped with cruel, elegant blades, like instruments of vengeance masquerading as weapons of justice. Her breath caught in her throat, and then she saw her. Across the scorched ground, veiled by curling smoke and shadow, stood a woman, no, a mirror image. Not quite her, not quite different. The same face, the same delicate features twisted into something cold, carved from steel and old agony. Hair like moonlight streaked in ash. Armor just as dark. A crown of iron pressed tight against her skull. The figure didn't speak. She didn't need to. Those burning golden eyes said everything. They screamed with betrayal, with the raw, naked pain of abandonment, of righteous wrath, of a heart left to rot by those it prayed for. They were not Asia's eyes. But they could be. The lance in Asia's hand trembled as her grip weakened. Her knees threatened to give out beneath her. She could feel it now, that searing pressure rising again, but this time, not from the fire. It came from within, and it scared her. With a soft gasp, Asia finally woke up from her nightmare. She shot upright in bed, chest heaving with silent, panicked breaths. Cold sweat clung to her skin like a second layer of guilt, soaking the collar of her nightgown and plastering golden strands of hair to her temple. Her room was dark, quiet, too quiet. The moon hung in the window, pale and distant, casting silver light across the floorboards like frozen fire. It seemed that no matter where she went, that dream would always come back to haunt her. Choking back a sob, Asia lay back in the bed that Sela had kindly prepared for her. The sheets were soft, freshly laundered, and smelled faintly of lavender and something older, perhaps cedar, or something just like the house itself. Familiar yet foreign. Safe, but not untouched by history. Asia buried herself beneath the covers, seeking refuge in the fabric, her hands clutching the edge like a lifeline as the tremble in her fingers gradually slowed. She hoped tomorrow would be a better day. She had Issei to look forward to, after all. The thought, delicate and shy, curled its way into her mind like a warm sunbeam through a cloudy window. A soft smile tugged at her lips, despite herself. He was kind, awkward, yes, but endearing in a way that made her chest flutter. His gentle eyes were quick to laugh, yet they hid a storm of burdens behind them. She saw it. She always did. It reminded her of herself in a strange, comforting way. She imagined him taking her hand tomorrow, tugging her along as he excitedly pointed out every stall, every snack vendor, every silly corner of town he thought she needed to see. The thought alone made her heart skip. They would laugh. They would share some fried food. He would offer her his scarf if she got cold. Maybe they would sit on a bench, watching the sun dip low over Kuro, and her mind wandered further, slipping into a realm of thoughts she wasn't quite prepared for. Asia imagined him bringing her back to his room after their day, his smile turning mischievous as the door clicked shut behind them. His hands would be firm but trembling, just like hers. They would share a clumsy but passionate kiss, all teeth and eagerness. He would pin her down on his bed, the weight of him above her making her breath catch in her throat as she clung to him, needing to feel. Suddenly, Asia slapped her cheeks with both palms, the sharp sound echoing in the quiet room. Her face burned, flushed all the way to her ears. It was too soon, she thought, mortified, pulling the covers over her head as if they could smother the thought before heaven could take note of it. She had just met him today. Her voice was a desperate whimper, muffled beneath the blanket as she curled into a ball. The cross around her neck pressed against her chest, its cool weight grounding her in reality. Still, even with her face buried in the pillow and shame curling hot in her stomach, she couldn't fully chase the thought away. Because underneath all her fear, all her trembling and guilt and holy vows, was a girl who longed to be loved. Rias observed her familiar as it flew into the living room and perched nearby to give its report. She had initially thought it was just a coincidence that Hyoudou shared the same last name as the infamous Magus killer, but now she understood. That explained why he hadn't returned. There was no sense in being upset with him, but he would still receive a lecture at the club tomorrow for breaking his promise. Rias sighed inwardly, a flicker of hurt passing through her. It stung a little, knowing it took a beautiful blonde foreigner to make him forget her so completely. Aquino tilted her head, curiosity evident in her voice as she mused about whether his parents were aware of his new identity as a devil. Rias smiled faintly, confident that they had addressed their son's transformation as soon as they realized what had happened. She sighed softly, acknowledging their efforts to shield their children from the truth of the moonlit world. Aquino teased about the potential consequences of their actions now that their son had been reincarnated as Rias's pawn. Rias's expression shifted sharply, a warning in her tone as she insisted that Issei should learn the truth directly from his parents rather than through others. Aquino, ever the provocateur, leaned in playfully, suggesting that Rias's fiancé might have reason to be concerned. Rias's demeanor changed, her aura flaring with a sudden intensity that chilled the air. She commanded Aquino not to mention that man again, emphasizing her authority as king. Aquino raised her hands in mock surrender, acknowledging that they would eventually need to inform their new kohai about him, especially with the upcoming raiding game approaching. As morning arrived, Issei woke to the familiar sight of his two little sisters clinging to his arms. He smiled to himself, wishing he could linger a little longer, but they needed to get ready for school. He felt a twinge of disappointment that the weekend had ended so quickly, especially after a date that had nearly cost him his life. The memory of Rainer's attack flashed in his mind, fueling his determination to settle the score with her. For now, though, he needed to focus on adjusting to his new life as a devil. Surprisingly, his transformation hadn't drastically changed his daily routine. He had only been a devil for a day and had yet to experience any of the expected downsides: no thirst for blood, no aversion to sunlight, and certainly no cravings for souls. So far, so good. He knew his new master would provide a more detailed explanation later. Suddenly, a sing-song voice broke the morning silence, sending a chill down his spine. He turned his head cautiously to see his little sister, half buried under the covers, blinking up at him with a mischievous smile. She requested a kiss, and he realized it was definitely time to wake up. He wasn't about to start his day by getting involved in Ilya's antics, especially not before breakfast. With a groan, he sat up, rubbing his eyes and preparing for whatever chaos Ilya had in store. He caught a glimpse of her as she crawled toward him, lips puckered in exaggerated fashion. Just as he braced himself, divine intervention arrived in the form of Miyu, who rolled over and positioned herself between them. Ilya, oblivious, leaned in and accidentally kissed Miyu's cheek instead. A stunned silence followed, and then Miyu's eyes opened wide in horror, her cheeks flushing red as she realized what had happened. Issei blinked, muttering to himself that it was definitely time to wake up. Unfortunately, the universe seemed intent on testing his patience. The door burst open with a bang, and Sella stormed in, her furious gaze sweeping across the scene. Her expression shifted from shock to horror as she took in the sight of Ilya too close to Miyu and Issei caught in the middle of the misunderstanding. Sella's body went rigid, and Issei instinctively raised his hands in surrender, declaring that he would retaliate if she tried to hit him. He knew it was futile to resist but hoped to buy himself a moment. Sella's eyes narrowed dangerously as she accused him of being a perverted delinquent. He protested, insisting that he had been asleep and not plotting anything. Sella, however, was already reaching for her slipper, and Issei screamed in anticipation. Ilya giggled from under the covers, while Miyu groaned and pulled the blanket over her head. Once Sella had exhausted her energy and slipper swings, Issei barely had time to groan before she grabbed him by the collar and dragged him down the hallway. Ilya and Miyu watched in stunned silence as their older brother disappeared around the corner. Ilya blinked rapidly, acknowledging Sella's anger, while Miyu noted that Sella had taken him into the bathroom without regard for gender boundaries. They both realized that Sella had forgotten he was a boy again. Meanwhile, in the bathroom, Issei scrambled against the doorframe, desperately trying to escape. He pleaded with Sella, insisting that he could bathe himself. Issei was adamant about his cleanliness. Sella, however, responded sharply, her voice clipped and professional, though her cheeks betrayed her embarrassment. She accused him of neglecting basic hygiene after witnessing a scene that left her flustered. Issei protested, insisting that what she saw was merely a sleep pile, a harmless gathering of siblings. Sella pointed out the proximity of his siblings to him, and he argued that it was unintentional. Sella's frustration escalated as she recalled the chaotic scene, and Issei, in a last-ditch effort to defend himself, mentioned that if he were truly up to something inappropriate, it would have involved her and Liz. The tension hung in the air until Sella, unable to contain herself, struck him on the head with a wash bucket. Issei yelped in response, admitting his poor joke. Sella accused him of harboring inappropriate thoughts, to which he retorted that she had barged in on him while he was sleeping. She insisted he get in the shower, and his cries for help echoed through the hallway. Meanwhile, Ilya and Miyu listened to the commotion, with Ilya half-jokingly suggesting they should rescue him. Miyu, however, pointed out that they would likely be dragged into the bathroom as well, which neither of them wanted. They shared a moment of sympathy for their brother before heading toward the kitchen, passing a bewildered Asia along the way. Asia, still groggy and in oversized pajamas, emerged from her room, clutching a stuffed rabbit. She asked what was happening, and Ilya brushed it off, claiming Sella was just being her usual self. Miyu added that it involved Issei being compromised, which piqued Asia's curiosity. Ilya smirked, revealing that Issei had been caught in bed with both of them. Asia's face flushed as she processed this information, her expression shifting to one of determination. She declared that if Sella intended to harm Issei, she would intervene. Ilya and Miyu were taken aback, with Ilya trying to clarify that no one had mentioned anything harmful. But Asia was already on her way, her resolve evident as she rushed down the hallway. Ilya and Miyu exchanged glances, bewildered by Asia's sudden attachment to Issei. They were interrupted by a loud crash from the bathroom, followed by an unexpected exclamation from Issei that left them both mortified. In a panic, they bolted in opposite directions, desperate to escape the awkwardness and prepare for school, hoping to forget the chaos of the morning. After the tumultuous encounter with Sella, Issei managed to get dressed without further incident. He was still trying to comprehend the whirlwind of events that had unfolded. One moment he was defending himself, and the next, Asia had stormed in, leading to a chaotic struggle between her and Sella. The bathroom had turned into a battleground, with water splashing and shampoo bottles flying. Just when he thought it couldn't get worse, Sella had slipped and landed in his lap, leaving him in a state of shock as Asia froze mid-yell, her eyes wide with disbelief. Issei's eyes widened in horror as he realized the towel had slipped. He barely managed to stammer out an explanation before Sella, still dazed from the earlier impact, shifted and inadvertently pressed against him in a way that was unintended. The moment was punctuated by a high-pitched sound that caught everyone off guard, prompting Sella to immediately place the blame on him, exclaiming that he was in the wrong place. He wanted to scream in frustration. Thankfully, she hadn't reacted violently, which was a small mercy. The confusion, combined with Asia's horrified glare, was enough for her to finally pull Sella out of the room, ending the chaos before it escalated further. Shaking his head to banish the memory, Issei glanced at the clock and nearly choked when he saw the time. There were less than 30 minutes until the first bell. He leapt to his feet with a surge of panic that only students under time pressure could understand. In a flurry of motion, he put on his uniform shirt backward, quickly corrected it, and dashed down the hallway, toast clenched between his teeth like every anime protagonist racing against the clock. He yelled over his shoulder, asking why no one had woken him up sooner, already knowing the answer. Ilya's voice echoed faintly behind him, reminding him that it wasn't the alarm clock's fault. He had been too busy nearly getting into trouble. He shouted back, not helping his situation, as he burst through the front door and leaped over the last 2 steps like an athlete in a race. The crisp morning air hit him with a refreshing chill, a stark reminder that the universe didn't care about his chaotic morning. The sun was already high in the sky, its rays shining down with a warmth that felt almost mocking. His school bag thumped rhythmically against his back as he sprinted down the familiar sidewalk, his shoes slapping against the pavement in a rhythm he had long memorized. He tried to ignore the damp strands of hair sticking to his forehead, a remnant of his chaotic shower. As he rounded a corner, he heard a smooth, confident voice greet him. He nearly stumbled upon seeing Rias Gremory standing there. She was technically his boss now, and perhaps the most stunning presence at Kuo Academy, dressed in heels and a blazer. Her crimson hair flowed like silk in the breeze, catching the sunlight and glowing. Her eyes, the color of blooming roses, were elegant and just a hint dangerous. He came to a stop, panting slightly, and managed to greet her. However, something about her poised demeanor clicked in his mind a moment too late. He found himself addressing her as Master, the words slipping out before he could stop it. Rias's grin blossomed, beautiful yet laced with a smug satisfaction that sent a shiver down his spine. He had seen that look before, usually right before someone said something alarming in a cheerful tone. Then she laughed, a full, aristocratic sound that echoed down the quiet street, reminiscent of a noblewoman's dramatic performance. Issei felt as though his soul had detached from his body. He accused her of practicing that laugh, scandalized. Rias wiped a non-existent tear from her eye, still smirking, and claimed that elegance was simply in her blood. He couldn't help but think that she was indeed a rich young lady. She sweetly informed him that now she was his rich young lady, and that Master suited her perfectly. Before he could respond, she stepped closer, her face mere inches from his, her eyes sparkling with amusement or perhaps something more dangerous. Then she teased him, suggesting he could call her something else entirely. The words hit him hard, and his mind raced with confusion. Was she really doing this on purpose? The teasing tone, the proximity, the smirk, it felt like a well-planned psychological game. Suddenly, he felt an uncomfortable tightness in his pants. Rias stepped back, feigning disappointment as if losing interest in a game. She told him he would have to settle for calling her by her title or just Rias when they weren't in the clubroom. For a brief moment, Issei stood frozen, his thoughts scattered and emotions in turmoil. He didn't know how to respond until a voice in his head urged him to act. The voice insisted that she was clearly interested in him and that he should seize the moment. Issei was taken aback, wondering why his inner voice was so eager for him to act on his feelings. With a deep breath, he stepped forward and rested a hand on Rias's shoulder. She blinked in surprise at the gesture, and his awkward smile was genuine. He assured her that he could call her whatever she wanted. Rias's eyes widened slightly, indicating he might have struck a chord. But before she could respond, the voice in his head made an inappropriate comment, and just like that, the connection went silent, leaving him in a state of disbelief. What a frustrating situation he found himself in. Suddenly, something warm brushed against his cheek, a fleeting touch that sent his heart racing. Rias's gentle voice followed, asking why he had to say things like that, so close he could feel her breath. Her words sank into him like sunlight through frost, warm and golden. He felt a flutter in his chest, something soft and reckless. A small part of him chose that moment to rear its head, filled with a sense of confidence he didn't quite understand. He turned, lifting an eyebrow with a teasing smirk, leaning in close enough that their noses almost touched. He thought he should keep it up, whatever it was. In that moment, he felt as if his soul had left his body. Where was this newfound confidence coming from? Why was his mouth moving on its own? Who was this man, and what had he done with Hyoudou Issei? More importantly, why was Rias blushing? Rias's eyes widened slightly, her cheeks flushing a pretty shade of pink that caught the morning sun. For a heartbeat, she looked caught between flustered and impressed. Then, with a flurry of motion, she reached out and grabbed his hand, her voice a little too high-pitched for her usual composed self as she suggested they better start moving before they were late for school. Without another word, she turned on her heel and dragged him down the sidewalk like a woman on a mission, her grip on his hand firm and surprisingly warm. Issei stumbled forward to keep up, blinking in stunned silence as the surreal moment caught up with him. Later, Liz stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, her eyes half-lidded as she addressed Sella flatly. She asked if they were going to talk about what happened that morning or if Sela would pretend it didn't happen until she combusted from shame. Sela froze mid-step, her back rigid, and let out a long, controlled breath through her nose, as if that alone could will the entire morning out of existence. Finally, she muttered a small, heavy response, filled with embarrassment. Liz tilted her head, curious about Sela's reaction. Sela remained silent, her ears turning red, which was answer enough. There was a long beat of silence as Liz stared at her, her expression unreadable. Liz pointed out that Sela had made a sound loud enough to be heard. Sela, feeling cornered, insisted that she was disoriented and that it was a reflexive sound of shock and pain. Liz's tone remained neutral as she remarked that it sounded more like embarrassment and arousal. Sela let out a strangled noise, spinning back around and clutching her head with both hands. She whispered to herself that this couldn't be happening. Liz walked into the room calmly, suggesting that the odds of misunderstanding were high given the circumstances. Sela snapped back, insisting it wasn't like that, but her voice echoed back at her, amplifying her embarrassment. She repeated her denial quietly, hoping that softness could erase the heat in the air. Her eyes flicked away as she shifted her weight, suddenly finding the polished floor very interesting. Liz shrugged nonchalantly, stating that it still had its intended effect, even if it hadn't gone as planned. Sela stiffened, narrowing her eyes in suspicion as she turned to face Liz, asking what she meant. Liz feigned contemplation, teasing Sela about her feelings for the air. Sela's lips parted in horror as Liz continued to point out Sela's increasingly physical advances, which she claimed were disciplinary actions. Sela protested, mortified, insisting she was just doing her job. Liz continued to tease her about the nature of her actions, and Sela faltered, burying her face in her hands, overwhelmed by embarrassment. Liz assured her that she wasn't judging, finding it cute in a tragic way. She pointed out that Issei wasn't rejecting the attention, which cut through the air like a sharp blade. Sela blinked, realizing the truth in Liz's words. Liz reiterated that Issei might not understand why, but he was aware of Sela's feelings. Sela turned crimson, expressing her frustration. Liz dismissed her protests, noting that Sela still let her get away with teasing. Sela stared in silence, hands clenched into fists, insisting that their conversation would not leave the room. Liz casually agreed, adding that it might be easier for Sela to get Issei's attention if she were more daring. Sela froze, horrified by the suggestion. Liz smirked over her shoulder, claiming it was her method. Sela's face turned scarlet as she shrieked in disbelief, mortified by the thought. She stormed forward, fists clenched, teeth grinding, demanding to know what Liz had done. Liz hummed thoughtfully, tapping a finger to her lips with mock innocence. She recalled the time she had asked him to help fix the dishwasher and had accidentally dropped a spoon, forcing her to bend over. Sela let out a sound of disbelief. Liz continued, reminiscing about the time she needed him to pass something from the top shelf while she was on her knees, noting the advantageous angle. Sela, feeling betrayed, exclaimed that Liz was an absolute delinquent and questioned her sense of shame. Liz replied breezily that she had none, unlike Sela, who tried to hide her feelings behind lectures and cold showers. Sela insisted she did not have a crush, but Liz pointed out how Sela scolded him for tracking dirt through the house and yelled when he forgot to separate laundry. Liz teased that Sela had practically melted when he complimented her cooking last week. Sela looked ready to explode, and Liz added with a sly grin that she didn't see Sela complaining when he walked around in just a towel after showering. Sela insisted it was different because he was a young man who needed to learn proper decency. Liz chuckled, suggesting that Sela was eager to help him towel off his hair, even though he could do it himself. Sela sputtered, at a loss for words, trying to defend her actions. Liz's tone softened as she pointed out that they both liked him and that he was aware of their feelings, even if he hadn't figured out what to do about it yet. There was a long pause, and Sela's hands relaxed from fists to trembling fingers at her sides. She finally spoke, her voice low, acknowledging that he was their master's son and that he shouldn't be someone they loved. Liz gently confirmed that it was too late for that. Then, with a teasing smirk, she suggested Sela could try the panty trick too, but warned her not to get mad when she won. Sella reflexively shot back that Liz wouldn't win, to which Liz's grin widened, teasing that Sella was in the running. Sella turned beet red, flustered, and protested that she hadn't meant it that way. Liz chuckled as she disappeared around the corner, leaving Sella standing in the middle of the room, emotionally drained and fuming. Sella muttered to herself, feeling her heart pound in her chest, frustrated with both Liz and Issei.